Ethan Mercer sat across from Claire Donovan in a cozy restaurant in downtown Asheville. Candlelight flickered between them. The conversation had flowed effortlessly for hours, filled with laughter and the kind of connection that felt rare. Then Claire set down her wine glass. Her eyes dropped to the tablecloth, unable to meet his gaze. "Ethan, you should probably leave now." He froze. "Did I say something wrong?" She took a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a single mom. Everyone leaves when they find out. So, you can go. I won't blame you." Ethan didn't stand. Instead, a gentle smile crossed his face. "Claire, I have a son." 3 hours earlier, Ethan stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his collar for the 5th time. Behind him, 6-year-old Owen sat cross-legged on the bed, watching his father with the kind of intensity only a child could muster. The boy had inherited his mother's bright blue eyes and his father's stubborn cowlick that no amount of gel could tame. "You look handsome, Dad," Owen announced, with all the authority of a fashion critic. "Remember to open the door for her. And don't talk with your mouth full, and maybe don't tell that joke about the lawnmower." Ethan turned to face his son, fighting back a grin. "If she's nice, can she come over sometime? I want to show her my Lego spaceship." The innocence of the question pierced something deep in Ethan's chest. 4 years. It had been 4 years since Sarah's death, 4 years of learning how to be both father and mother. Tonight was his first real attempt at dating. He knelt down to Owen's level. "Let's see how tonight goes first, okay, buddy?" Owen nodded sagely. "Okay. But I hope she likes spaceships." Ethan pulled up to Claire's townhouse at exactly 7 o'clock. The small brick building sat on a quiet street lined with mature oaks. A trellis covered in climbing roses framed the entrance, and window boxes overflowed with purple petunias. When Claire opened the door, Ethan forgot how to breathe. She wore a navy blue dress that brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes, and her auburn hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She smiled nervously, tucking a strand behind her ear. Hi, he managed. "You look. Wow." She laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Wow, yourself." The drive to the restaurant took them through the heart of Asheville. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing with surprising ease. Claire asked about his work, and Ethan found himself explaining his latest project with more enthusiasm than he'd shown anyone in months. He was designing the landscape for a new mountain resort, incorporating native plants and sustainable water features. "Most people's eyes glaze over when I start talking about drainage systems," he admitted. Claire shook her head. "I love hearing people talk about things they're passionate about." She told him about her bakery, Morning Light, which she'd opened 5 years ago. Her cinnamon rolls had become legendary in the neighborhood, with a line forming outside every Saturday morning. At the restaurant, a small Italian place with exposed brick walls and soft music playing in the background, they continued to discover coincidences that made it feel like the universe was conspiring in their favor. They'd both grown up in small towns. They'd both moved to Asheville seeking something different. They reached for the breadbasket at the exact same moment, their hands brushing. The touch sent electricity through Ethan's fingers. Chemistry. Real, undeniable chemistry. It had been so long since he'd felt anything like this that he'd almost forgotten it existed. Throughout dinner, he found himself leaning closer, hanging on her words. She had a way of gesturing when she talked, her hands painting pictures in the air. When she laughed, her whole face transformed. They talked about Asheville, about their favorite hiking trails and hidden restaurants. They avoided the deeper subjects by unspoken mutual agreement. Both of them were holding something back. He hadn't mentioned Owen. He told himself he wanted tonight to be about them, just two adults getting to know each other. But the truth was that the last woman he'd tried to date had grown distant the moment she learned about his son. The rejection had stung more than he'd expected. As the waiter cleared their dinner plates, Ethan thought about how much he wanted there to be a second date. For the first time in 4 years, he wanted someone to stay. The tiramisu arrived, but Claire barely noticed it. Her fingers fidgeted with the corner of her napkin, folding and unfolding it in a nervous rhythm. Across the table, Ethan was telling a story about a client who had insisted on a garden maze despite having only a quarter-acre lot, and normally she would have been laughing. Instead, her heart was pounding against her ribs. It was too good. This night, this man, this feeling in her chest. And Claire had learned the hard way that too good always came with a price. She'd been here before. 3 times, to be exact. 3 perfect first dates that had ended with the same devastating pattern. The first time, she'd waited until the end of the evening to mention Lily. Michael had smiled politely, said he'd had a wonderful time, and then never called again. His silence said everything his words hadn't. The second time, she'd tried to slip it in casually over appetizers. James had seemed fine at first, even interested. Then she'd caught him glancing at the photo of Lily in her wallet, and his expression had shifted. He'd made an excuse to leave early. The third time had been the worst. Kevin had made it to the second date before asking about her daughter. His response had been a verbal punch to the gut. I want kids someday, but my own kids. Not someone else's. Someone else's, as if Lily were an inconvenience to be worked around. Claire had cried for 3 days. After that, she'd developed a strategy. Tell them early. Before dessert, before hope could take root, before she could start imagining a future. Claire? Ethan's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. You okay? She looked up and found his brown eyes filled with genuine concern. Kind eyes, she thought, the kind of eyes that might actually stay. But that was the problem. She was already hoping, already imagining. And she couldn't do that again. There's something I need to tell you, she heard herself say. Ethan set down his fork. Whatever it is, you can tell me. The gentleness in his voice almost broke her resolve. I've done this before, she began. 3 first dates that all ended the same way. She met his eyes, forcing herself not to look away. The first man said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. The second one saw a photo in my wallet and suddenly had somewhere else to be. The third looked me in the eye and said he wanted his own kids someday, not someone else's. Ethan's expression shifted, a furrow forming between his brows. Claire, what are you trying to tell me? She took a deep breath. I have a daughter. Her name is Lily. She's 5 years old, and she's the center of my entire universe. The words hung in the air between them. So if you want to leave, I understand. I won't blame you, but I need you to go now, before I start hoping this could be something more. Claire's hands trembled in her lap. She braced herself for the inevitable. But Ethan didn't stand up. He didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Claire, sit down. She realized she'd half risen from her chair. Slowly, she lowered herself back into her seat. Her heart hammered in her chest. This wasn't how it usually went. Please, he said softly, let me show you something. Ethan pulled out his phone and swiped through his photos until he found the one he was looking for. He turned the screen toward Claire. A boy grinned up at her, gap-toothed and joyful, holding a Lego spaceship above his head like a trophy. His name is Owen. He's 6. And he asked me this morning if I was finally going to find him a friend's mom. Claire stared at the photo, then at Ethan, then back at the photo. You have a son? I was afraid to tell you, he admitted, his voice rough. The last time I tried to date, the woman disappeared the moment she found out. I told myself I didn't want to scare you off before you had a chance to know me. He laughed softly, without humor. Turns out we were both doing the same thing. Claire felt something crack open in her chest. We're the same, she whispered. Yeah. Ethan's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. We are. He took a breath and continued. Owen's mother, Sarah, she was a nurse at the hospital downtown. She worked the night shift, came home at 6 in the morning to have breakfast with us. It was our routine. His voice grew quieter. 4 years ago, she was driving home after a double shift. A truck ran a red light. She never made it home. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." Owen was too. He doesn't remember her. Not really. Just pictures and stories I've told him. He cleared his throat. "I haven't dated since. Every time my mom suggested it, I made some excuse. But the truth was, I was terrified that someone would meet my son and decide we weren't worth the effort." He met her eyes, and Claire saw her own fears mirrored there. "So, when you said everyone leaves when they find out, I understood. Because I've been waiting for the same thing." Claire found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone. "I tell people Brad left," she said, the name bitter on her tongue. "But I never tell them why. We were together for 3 years in college. Got married quickly when I found out I was pregnant." She shook her head. Lily was 8 months old. She was teething, crying constantly. It was 3 in the morning, and Brad stood in the doorway of the nursery and said, "I didn't sign up for this." The memory still had the power to wind her. The next week, he put divorce papers on the kitchen table, told me he loved me but couldn't love this life, and then he was gone. No custody request, no visitation, just gone. Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. "Then he didn't deserve either of you." It was such a simple statement, but it landed somewhere deep inside Claire. In 5 years, no one had ever said that to her. Not her mother, who'd been supportive but practical. Not her friends, who'd commiserated but suggested she'd dodged a bullet. But Ethan didn't qualify it. Just acknowledged the fundamental truth that Brad had failed them. For the first time in 5 years, Claire didn't feel like she needed to apologize for being a single mother. The candle between them flickered. Ethan smiled. "So," he said, "what do you say we start this date over? No more secrets. No more waiting for the other person to run." Claire's laugh surprised her. It came from somewhere genuine, somewhere she'd forgotten existed. "I'd like that." They stayed until the restaurant closed, talking about everything they'd been afraid to mention before. Owen's obsession with space, Lily's shyness around new people, the particular exhaustion of single parenthood. When they finally left, the night air was cool against their flushed cheeks. They crossed the street to the Riverwalk, where old-fashioned lampposts cast pools of light on the brick pathway. The French Broad River murmured beside them, and somewhere in the distance, a guitar player strummed a familiar melody. They found a wooden bench overlooking the water and sat close enough that their shoulders touched. Claire pulled her cardigan tighter against the chill. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Anything. I met Brad in my sophomore year of college. He was charming. Everyone loved him. We dated for 3 years, and I thought I knew what our life would be." She watched the light play on the water. "We got married quickly when I found out about the pregnancy. I was terrified, but also excited. I thought a baby would bring us closer. Instead, it showed me who he really was." She told him about the early days of motherhood, the fog of exhaustion and hormones, the overwhelming love mixed with complete bewilderment. Brad had retreated almost immediately. At first, she'd made excuses. He was adjusting. He was tired, too. He needed time to figure out how to be a father. But it wasn't time he needed. It was an exit. She remembered the night he'd said those words, the way he'd stood in the doorway, watching her rock a screaming baby at 3 in the morning, and the cold detachment in his eyes. He didn't fight for custody, didn't even ask for visitation rights. He just signed the papers and moved to California. "I haven't heard from him in 4 years." She paused, her voice catching. Part of me was relieved. I didn't have to share her, didn't have to coordinate schedules or worry about him disappointing her. But another part, the part that grew up with a father who showed up to every recital and every soccer game, who taught me to ride a bike and held my hand at my grandmother's funeral. Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. I always wondered if Lily would blame me someday for not being enough to make him stay, for choosing someone who would walk away from his own child. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Can I tell you about Sarah?" He leaned back against the bench, his eyes on the river. She was the planner. I was the dreamer. She used to joke that I had my head in the clouds and she had her feet on the ground, and together we made one functional adult. A small smile played at his lips, tinged with sadness. She pushed me to start my own landscape design business. I was working for someone else, playing it safe, collecting a steady paycheck, and she sat me down one night and said, "Ethan, you're too talented to spend your life making someone else's vision come true. What are you so afraid of?" He shook his head. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. When I finally took the leap and started the company, she worked overtime at the hospital to cover our expenses. Double shifts, holidays, whatever it took. She never complained. Not once. She just did what needed to be done, because that's who she was. When Owen was born, she was luminous. That's the only way to describe it. She took to motherhood like she'd been doing it her whole life, made it look effortless, even though I know it wasn't. She could calm him when nothing I did worked. She knew the difference between his hungry cry and his tired cry before I could even tell he was upset. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The night she died, I'd made dinner. Nothing special, just pasta with that marinara sauce she loved. Owen was already asleep. I remember sitting at the table, waiting for her, thinking about how nice it would be to have a quiet meal together. Maybe watch a movie, fall asleep on the couch like we used to before Owen came along. He paused, and Claire could see him struggling to continue. The hospital called at 4:30 in the morning. I remember staring at the red numbers on the clock, not understanding why my phone was ringing at that hour. They said there'd been an accident, a truck running a red light. They said she didn't suffer. They said a lot of things that I don't remember anymore. Claire took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his, holding on tight. After the funeral, I had to figure out how to be a father without her. How to explain to a 2-year-old why Mommy wasn't coming home. How to answer questions I didn't have answers to. How to fill the silence where her voice used to be. He turned to face Claire, and she could see unshed tears in his eyes. Some nights, after Owen's asleep, I sit in the dark and wonder if I'm enough. If I'm giving him everything he needs. If I'm doing any of this right. If Sarah would be proud of the father I've become or disappointed by all the ways I fall short. He let out a shaky breath. So when you said you wondered if Lily would blame you for not being enough, I understood. I understood completely. Because I ask myself that same question every single day. Claire reached up and touched his cheek gently, her thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. You are enough. I can see it in how you talk about him, in the way your whole face lights up when you say his name, in the fact that your 6-year-old reminded you to open the door for me and not talk with your mouth full. That's not a kid who's missing anything, Ethan. That's a kid who knows he's loved. Ethan covered her hand with his, pressing it against his face. So are you, Claire. Whatever Brad made you believe, whatever doubts he left behind, you are more than enough, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over the mountains. The guitar player had moved on, and the night was quiet, except for the river. So, Claire finally said, "What do we do now?" Ethan considered the question. "I think we take it slow. I have Owen to consider, and you have Lily. We can't just dive in without thinking about them." Claire nodded, relieved that he understood. "But I don't want to pretend this didn't happen," he continued. "I want to see you again, Claire. I want to know you. All of you." She felt something shift inside her, a door she'd thought was permanently locked creaking open. "I want that too." "Then we take it slow," he said. "But we take it together. Together." It was such a simple word, but Claire couldn't remember the last time it had applied to her life. She'd been doing everything alone for so long. Together, she agreed. He smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "What are you doing next Saturday?" "Owen has a soccer game. Maybe after we could have lunch? There's a park near Morning Light," she said. "If you don't mind the drive." "I don't mind at all." They exchanged numbers properly, not through the dating app but directly, like real people planning a real future. When Ethan drove her home, he held her hand across the console and said, "Thank you for telling me the truth. Thank you for staying." At her doorstep, he squeezed her hand one final time. "I'll call you tomorrow." She watched him drive away, then leaned against her door. For the first time since Brad had walked out, she felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Hope. 3 weeks later, Claire stood behind the counter of Morning Light, wiping down the espresso machine and humming to herself. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the display case of fresh pastries. Things with Ethan had been good. Better than good. They'd had lunch that Saturday, dinner the following Wednesday, and a long phone call that had lasted until 2 in the morning. Owen and Lily had met the previous weekend at the park, a carefully orchestrated playdate that had exceeded all expectations. Owen had appointed himself Lily's protector within minutes, holding her hand as they climbed the jungle gym and sharing his fruit snacks. Lily, who usually hid behind Claire's legs around new people, had actually giggled. Claire was just thinking about calling Ethan when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up with her customer service smile already in place and then felt the blood drain from her face. Brad looked different. Thinner, older. The confident swagger she remembered had been replaced by something hesitant. He stood in the doorway of her bakery like he didn't quite belong there, and Claire supposed he didn't. "Claire," his voice was the same. She hated that his voice was the same. "What are you doing here?" she managed. He took a tentative step inside. "I know this is unexpected. I should have called first." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've been doing a lot of work on myself. Therapy. And I want to know my daughter." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. She gripped the counter to steady herself. "You want to know her? Now, after 4 years of nothing." "I'm not asking for custody," he said quickly. "I just want to be part of her life. Visits. I want her to know she has a father who cares." "You had a chance to show her that," Claire said, her voice trembling. "Every time you didn't call on her birthday, every time you were just gone." Brad's eyes glistened. "I was a coward. I know that now. But I'm not that person anymore." Claire didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to throw him out. But another part, the part that remembered being a little girl waiting for her own father at the door, couldn't quite do it. "I need you to leave," she said finally. "I can't do this right now." Brad nodded slowly. "I'll be in town for a while. When you're ready to talk, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." He left a card on the counter and walked out. Claire stood frozen, staring at the card. Her hands were shaking. Everything she'd built suddenly felt fragile. That night, she called Ethan. The moment she heard his voice, she started to cry. She told him everything. Brad's appearance, his request, the terror clawing at her chest. What if he takes her? What if Lily wants him? Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finally fell silent, he said simply, "I'm coming over." He arrived 20 minutes later with ice cream and tissues. He held her on the couch and didn't promise that everything would be okay. Instead, he said the only thing that mattered. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." Claire buried her face in his chest. She'd been alone for so long. Having someone to lean on felt terrifying and wonderful all at once. Later, Owen asked his father a question that Ethan relayed the next morning. "Dad, is Lily's dad bad?" Ethan had answered carefully. "People can change, buddy, but change takes time and proof." It was the wisest thing anyone had said about the whole situation. The next few weeks were difficult. Brad didn't push, but he didn't disappear either. He sent a birthday card for Lily, nothing extravagant, just a simple card with a gift certificate. He showed up at the bakery once more, just to buy a coffee, just to say hello. He was giving Claire space, and somehow that made it harder. If he'd been aggressive, she could have fought back. But this patient, changed Brad was harder to categorize. Meanwhile, Claire found herself pulling away from Ethan, not consciously, but in small ways. She declined a dinner invitation because she was too tired. She kept phone calls short. When he tried to talk about Brad, she changed the subject. She didn't realize what she was doing until Ethan pointed it out. They were walking through the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, the kids running ahead, when he stopped at a quiet corner. "You're pushing me away." It wasn't an accusation. His voice was gentle, but the words stung. "I'm not," she started to say, but they both knew it was a lie. Ethan faced her fully. "Claire, I understand that this is hard, but I can't help you if you won't let me in." "You don't know him," she said, her defenses rising. "He manipulates. He says the right things until he gets what he wants, and then he's gone. I'm not asking you to trust him. I'm asking you to trust me." Claire felt something crack inside her. "I don't know how," she admitted. "I've been doing this alone for so long. Every time I let someone in, they leave. My father died when I was 12. My husband walked out. Every man I've dated since has disappeared." She blinked back tears. "And now you're here, and you're wonderful, and part of me is just waiting for you to realize this is too much and walk away." Ethan stepped closer. "Claire, look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere. I have my own baggage, my own kid, my own complicated life. I'm not looking for easy, I'm looking for real. And this is real." He cupped her face in his hands. "But I need you to let me in. All the way in." For a long moment, Claire just stood there. She could keep her walls up, protect herself, or she could take the risk. She thought about that first night, when he'd shown her Owen's picture instead of running. He'd stayed then. Maybe he would keep staying. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try." Ethan's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's all I'm asking." She took a breath. "I think I need to talk to Brad. Not to forgive him, but to understand what he actually wants. And I need you there with me." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Name the time and place." They met at a neutral coffee shop downtown, a place Claire had never been and had no memories attached to. She arrived early with Ethan, her hands wrapped around a mug she had no intention of drinking. When Brad walked in, she saw him register Ethan's presence with surprise. His step faltered for just a moment, something flickering across his face that might have been jealousy or regret or both. But to his credit, he didn't comment. He just sat down across from them and waited, his own hands folded on the table, his posture that of someone who knew he was on trial and had no intention of mounting a defense. "I want to know why," Claire said without preamble. "Not the excuses you gave me back then, not the version you've practiced in therapy, the real reason." Brad was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, people walked by, living their ordinary lives, oblivious to the reckoning happening inside. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, in a way Claire had never heard before, not even at their wedding, not even when Lily was born. "Because I was a coward. You were so natural with her. From the moment Lily was born, you just knew what to do. You knew what her cries meant. You knew how to calm her down. You knew how to love her without instruction, and I was useless." He stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "I held her that first day in the hospital, and I felt nothing, just terror. Everyone kept telling me the bond would come, that fathers sometimes take longer to connect. But weeks went by, and then months, and I still felt like I was holding someone else's child. like I was an imposter in my own family. He finally looked up, meeting Claire's eyes with something that might have been courage or might have been desperation. I kept waiting for some switch to flip, for the fatherly instincts everyone talks about to kick in. But they didn't, and instead of trying harder, instead of admitting I was struggling and asking for help, I convinced myself that you'd both be better off without me, that I was just making things worse by being there, that my absence would be less damaging than my inadequate presence. His voice cracked. That was a lie I told myself to justify running. I know that now. I've spent 2 years in therapy learning to take responsibility instead of making excuses, learning to sit with discomfort instead of fleeing from it, learning that love isn't always a feeling. Sometimes it's a choice you make over and over again, even when it's hard. Claire absorbed his words. They didn't erase 4 years of silence. They didn't make up for every milestone he'd missed, every nightmare she'd soothed alone, every time Lily had asked where her daddy was and Claire had to invent another gentle lie. But they were, at least, honest. More honest than anything he'd said when he was leaving. "What exactly are you asking for?" she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Supervised visits," Brad said immediately. "Once a week, for an hour, at a place you choose, with you present the entire time. I'm not asking to take her overnight. I'm not asking to be her parent. I just want to be someone she knows. Someone who shows up. Someone she can form her own opinion about, instead of growing up with nothing but questions and a father-shaped hole in her life." Claire thought about Lily. About the questions that would inevitably come as she grew older, the curiosity about the father she'd never known. She thought about her own father, how his presence in her childhood had shaped her, how his death when she was 12 had left a hole that nothing could fill. Brad wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for a second chance at marriage or even at friendship. He was asking for the opportunity to be a small, consistent presence in his daughter's life. And Claire realized, with a clarity that surprised her, that this wasn't really about Brad at all. It was about Lily, about giving her daughter the chance to know her father on her own terms, to form her own relationship with him, even if that relationship was complicated and imperfect. 1 hour a week, Claire said slowly. Supervised. At the park near my house. If you miss a single visit without an emergency, we're done. If you confuse her or upset her, we're done. If you give me any reason to doubt your commitment, we're done. Brad nodded quickly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you, Claire. I won't let you down. You already did, she said quietly, without malice. This is you proving you won't do it again. When Brad left, Ethan reached for her hand. How do you feel? Claire considered the question, terrified. Like I just made either the best or worst decision of my life. She paused, but also lighter. Like I finally put something down I didn't realize I was carrying. They walked to his car, and Claire stopped him before he could open her door. That night at the restaurant, when you didn't leave, you changed everything. Ethan smiled. You changed everything too. You reminded me I could still hope. 4 months later, spring had come to Asheville. The dogwoods were blooming, pink and white blossoms softening every street corner. Claire stood in Ethan's backyard, watching Owen and Lily chase each other around the grill. They'd become inseparable, developing their own language of inside jokes. Owen called her Lil now, and Lily called him O. Brad had kept his word. 4 months of weekly visits, never missing once. Lily was still cautious around him, but she no longer hid when he arrived. She'd started calling him Brad instead of ignoring him entirely. It wasn't Daddy, but it was something. Claire and Ethan had settled into a rhythm. She'd moved into a house 2 blocks away from his. Taking it slow, they still called it, though everyone who knew them rolled their eyes. Tonight was a barbecue, just the 4 of them. Ethan flipped burgers while Claire assembled a salad, and the kids shrieked with laughter. Hey, Owen suddenly announced, running up to them. We should take a family photo. Claire's heart stuttered. We're not technically. She didn't know how to finish. Owen looked at her with the logic of a 6-year-old. You're Lily's mom. Dad likes you a lot. Lily is my friend. That's family, right? Claire looked at Ethan. He was watching her with that soft expression she'd come to recognize. Yeah, she heard herself say. I guess that is family. They gathered together, Ethan setting his phone on a timer. The first photo was terrible. Lily had her eyes closed, Owen was making a face, and Claire and Ethan were both looking at the kids instead of the camera. Again, Owen demanded. By the third attempt, something shifted. Owen wrapped his arm around Lily. Lily leaned against Claire, and when the shutter clicked, Ethan's hand was on the small of Claire's back. It wasn't a perfect photo, but it was real. Later, after the kids were asleep in Owen's room, Claire and Ethan sat on the back porch watching fireflies blink in the darkness. I didn't think I'd find this again, Ethan said quietly. Neither did I. He reached for her hand. I'm glad you didn't run that first night. I'm glad you didn't either. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've learned to trust each other. They hadn't said I love you yet. Some milestones still felt too fragile to rush, but Claire knew she did. She loved this man who had shown up with ice cream when she was falling apart, who had held her hand through difficult conversations, who looked at Lily like she was something precious. She loved him, and someday soon she would tell him. But for now, this was enough. The fireflies, the quiet night, the certainty that she wasn't alone anymore. 1 year later, on Lily's first day of first grade, Claire woke before dawn to pack the perfect lunch. Peanut butter and honey sandwich cut into a star shape, apple slices, a juice box, and tucked in the corner a small note. Mama loves you. Have the best day. Lily had been nervous all week, but this morning she was vibrating with excitement. She'd picked out her outfit 3 days ago, a purple dress with butterflies. What if no one wants to play with me? She asked, as Claire brushed her hair. Then they're missing out on the best friend they could ever have. What if the teacher is mean? Then you come home and tell me, and we'll figure it out together. Lily considered this. Will O be there? Owen will meet you at recess, he promised. A small smile crept onto Lily's face. Okay, I guess I'm ready. Ethan drove all 4 of them to school. Owen had been attending this school for 2 years now, and he took his role as guide with utmost seriousness. The cafeteria has pizza on Fridays, he informed Lily, and the playground has monkey bars. But don't worry if you can't do them yet. I'll teach you. At the entrance, a crowd of parents and children milled around. Claire knelt down to adjust Lily's backpack straps, her throat tight. You're going to be amazing, she whispered. Lily hugged her fiercely. Then she turned to Owen. Let's go. Claire watched them walk toward the entrance, Owen's hand holding Lily's. Just before they disappeared through the doors, Lily turned back. For a moment, Claire expected her to run back, to change her mind. Instead, Lily let go of Owen's hand and ran toward Ethan. She wrapped her arms around his waist. Bye, Mr. Ethan. It was the first time she'd done that, the first time she'd included him in the goodbye that had always been exclusively Claire's. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. Ethan looked down at the little girl hugging him, and his expression was something Claire would remember forever. Have the best first day, Lil. Lily beamed up at him, then ran back to Owen. They disappeared into the school together. Claire and Ethan stood on the sidewalk as other parents filtered away. Neither moved. You know what I thought that first night? Claire finally said. Ethan turned to her. That I'd run? That I'd never see you again. That you'd be like all the others. That I'd go home and add you to the list of people who couldn't handle my life. She stepped closer. I was so ready to be hurt that I almost didn't let myself hope. Ethan pulled her into his arms. Good thing I'm stubborn. She laughed against his chest. Good thing we both are. They walked back to the truck, hand in hand. The morning stretched ahead of them, ordinary in the best possible way. Claire had pastries to bake, Ethan had a client meeting. They'd pick up the kids at 3 and hear every detail of Lily's first day. It was mundane, it was routine, it was everything Claire had given up on ever having. "She said you can leave," Ethan murmured as he opened her door. "What?" "That first night. You said I could leave. You expected me to." Claire smiled up at him. "But you didn't." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." He kissed her forehead, soft and sure. "And I'm not going to." She believed him. After everything, after all the walls and all the times she'd been let down, she believed him, because Ethan Mercer had shown up, not just once, on that first date when he'd revealed his own secret instead of running from hers, but every day since. Every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, every time she'd tried to push him away, he'd stayed, and in staying, they'd found what they'd both given up on. A second chance, not just at love, but at family.